be nice if we could understand that I'm holding down control, and when I hold down control I want height, and when I hold down shift I want the range, but it's not that smart. So just be careful of that when you're selecting multiple values from that drop down, because you could create a range and you think, oh, this is fine, I want GL account 1,000 through 1,500. Well, sometime during the year you would create a new account that's 1,400 that you don't want in your report, and now it's being included in your total. So that's a dangerous thing with ranges outside of dates. All right. Everybody's good? Great. So now we need to add some more information, right? We would never really have a report this basic. We would never just say, well, here's a list of my users, my salesperson, my customer numbers. That makes no sense. So let's go back to example 1 for the regions we want to put into it. Okay? And on page 312, we're going to talk about the NL sum, the NL first, and the NL count. You know what? I'll even throw in the count unique. For this, I'm going to break out my intro examples here. So we've talked about our replicators here, our rows, columns, and sheets, and everything we're doing up to this point is just going to be rows. We're not going to really talk about columns or sheets, but the functionality works the same. But now we want to talk about this first sum, count, and count unique. I just put some little notes here as to kind of what the information is. A first, to me, is a glorified VLOOKUP. Instead of looking at a table in my file, or a file, it's going out to the database, performing the same thing. Go look in this column for this value. The first time you find it, bring me a value associated with it. Glorified VLOOKUP. Sum works just like the Excel sum. Look at all these values and sum them up. Except now we're going out to the database and summing up records instead of look at these cells and sum them up. Count, again, we're counting records. But count unique is a little bit different. Okay? Count unique is we want to count the variation in a specific field. So let's talk about count versus count unique first. Right? I have a very basic question, how many GL accounts do I have? And this is where, as you start to get to know your database, where you need to go to get information. I can say, okay, well, I need to count GL accounts. I know that in my GL account table, each record represents an individual account. It's a 1-to-1 ratio there. One record, one account. Therefore, if I were to go through and count the number of records in my GL account table, I know how many GL accounts I have. So I can come in, I can drop this down, I can choose count. When I choose count, we can see all of a sudden, the only thing I get to choose is my table. It's no longer asking me for a field. Because it doesn't care about fields. It wants to count the whole record. It either counts the record or it doesn't count the record. So in this instance, what table do I want to count records from? My GL account table. Now I can add filters here if I wanted to. If I were to change this question, how many balance sheet GL accounts do I have? I could come in and say, okay, let's add a filter and say, count the number of GL accounts that are labeled balance sheet. 132. Count unique is slightly different. How many different GL accounts have at least one transaction? Well, I'm now after two things, GL accounts and transactions. You need to understand that correlation. So again, it comes down to this master versus transactional table. What am I really after? I want to know which accounts are found in a transactional table. So in this instance, I'm going to use a count unique. When I use count unique, I now need to specify a table and a field. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, well, if I go to my GL entry table, that's where all my GL transactions occur. I can certainly look at my GL account number field within that table, but if I were just to count those records, if I change this from count unique to count, It's going to count all the records. What I want is a count of how many different GL account numbers do I find here. This is essentially kind of a summary list. Right? It's looking at a field that's non-unique and counting the variation instead of bringing back the variation. Whoops, I'm in the wrong spell, but I have 106 different GL accounts that have some sort of transaction. So the count unique kind of mirrors the concept of a summary list. The NL count is going to kind of mirror our other type of summary list, our data dump, which we'll talk about after we're done with this section. So let's look at our NL first, because I said this is a glorified VLOOKUP. Well, in our VLOOKUP, we have to tell it first, right? VLOOKUP. What table do I want it to go look at? Well, I want you to look at my G/L account table. What field do you want me to bring back? In this instance, I want you to bring back the account name. What am I supposed to search for? Well, I want you to bring me back the name when the when the number is equal to, in this instance, 44,100. Oh, you know what? This is a different data source, so let's do this. We'll just grab any one of these. 1005. Tangible fixed assets. I'm telling you what value. So it looks through that table and says, oh look, I found when this number, this record, the number is 1005, and it brings back the name associated with it. Now you can use NL first to bring back the first of a list of things, but it's far more complicated. I shouldn't say far more complicated. There is more work involved, because what you have to do is look at a list, sort the list to tell it, well, I want this to be the order of the list, now bring back the first value. I typically tell people to use an NL first when you're asking a question that has one and only one answer. What is the posting date of this transaction? What is the quantity on hand of this one item? Right? It should only have one quantity on hand. What is the name of this salesperson? All these things are questions that have one answer. That's typically when you use the NL first. And then I've got this one here that's going to compare the NL sum and the GL balance. I'm going to show off the GL a little bit here, and then we'll come back to it on day 3. I can use my NL sum and my GL balance to get the exact same number here. Sum up the transactions total for account, we'll use, what was it, 1005, and, well actually, you know what, let's just connect to my right database and then we don't have to worry about this. So give me the sum of the transactions for that account in January 2016. Well, if I drop this down, I have a sum function. I keep track of my GL transactions in my GL entry table. Oh, now of course it's showing the table numbers. And I'm going to say, give me the amount. Sum up the amount of each of those transactions. But I have 2 filters. The first one, where the account number is 44,100, and the posting date is 01/01/16, 01/31/16. Okay. Negative 18,648. Okay. But what is that having to do? It's having to go out to my GL entry table. It's a very large table. Outside of the item ledger entry and the value entry table, it's one of the largest tables you can possibly call against. So this might say, okay, well I need to go through 10 million records to find the 50 that meet my criteria and then sum all those up. It's going to run a little bit slow. What I can do is use my GL function. So I'm going to choose the GL here. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is use my account 44,100. I know that. I know my start date, Well, it was 01/01/16. My end date was, well, except GL function does not like no slashes for whatever reason. But I still have to choose a what. And my options are balance, budget, credits, or debits. Well, I'm not after the budget, so I'm going to rule that out. I might have both credits and debits in there, right? Very rare that I just have one. So I need both of those. That just leaves balance. We're going to come back to this on day 3 and talk about this. But I'm going to choose balance. When I choose balance and I put a start date and an end date, it finds the net change for that account between those 2 dates, which is essentially summing up all of the transactions that occurred in between those 2. This will perform much faster because it's using flow fields and nav. What was the balance on this date? What was the balance on this date? Subtract them out. Much quicker.
Can you do balance dot dot and the date on that box?
You could do
Or
here,
blank?
right? So I could get around this, right? I could do, there is in my GL account table, I wouldn't do amount, I would say there's balance at date,
Oh, okay.
okay? And I would have to enter in my, let's see, this will be number. And here I would use the date filter to look at those dates. And yes, that's giving me the sum of all those, so I need the, actually, I don't know if this would work. I've actually never tried it this way. Yep. Is that still sum? It's supposed to be. I hope I see that. Yeah. No, that doesn't work. This would work with our second type of list because it's going to actually look at those flow fields. So in nav, we've got some flow fields that will change over time. It's a calculated field. In this instance, it doesn't understand this date. If I chose a specific date, like the 31st, give me the balance as of that date. It understands that. Passing in, give me the balance at the date. Go look at this GL account, give me the balance of the date where the date is that one specific day, but it doesn't understand that range of dates at that point. Because there's no way for it to understand that concept of, if you try and do a sum, right, it's going to look at all those individual transactions and try and sum them up. If I try and just grab the first from a date range date, it's not going to know which one to choose because there's 30 different days it could choose from.
Okay.
So it's a great question. Actually, I've never had that question. I've never tried it. So yeah. In this instance, we either have to go to the GL entry and sum up all those transactions, or we would have to use the GL balance. When I can use the GL balance, I definitely use it. The downside to using the GL is right off the bat, I can only filter on my 2 standard global dimensions, global dimension 1, global dimension 2. And here it's department code and project code. Now I can filter on other advanced dimensions if someone has gone through and created an analysis view for me. So for example, if I choose campaign, right, this is a different view. I now have access to the sales campaign code, the area code, the business code group, and the salesperson code. So I can do this, and this is one of those things that I tell people, look, do you want to take a hit on the front end? You know, when you're entering these transactions, it's going to take a little bit longer to enter them in because it's going to have to double post them, essentially, right? Once to the analysis view, once to the GL entry. Or do you want to take a hit on the back end when you try and run the report and you're sitting there for 20 minutes? How often do you run this report? Once a month? Once every 6 months? Once a quarter? Where's that value going to hit you? So you kind of have to make that decision on your own.
Do you lose drill down functionality because it's a different, because it's retrieving differently?
No, this one, right? This is still going to the GL entry. So we can see that drill down, open that up. Essentially the GL, when it does that drill down, it's going to go look at the GL entry because that's what it's doing. Those flow fields are actually looking at the GL entry and determining those values. It's just doing it kind of behind the scenes. So those are our 4 data functions that we use most often. First, some count unique. And you can see a reference for them on page 312, 313, and they have left off count unique for whatever reason. Even though in one of the examples it's like, hey, why don't you try and figure out the count unique? It's like, that's really nice, thanks. So let's do some examples, right? We're going to go back to example 1 here, our salesperson code. In the previous example, we created a list of all salespersons who are currently assigned to a non-block customer. Okay, and we had.
What page are you on?
Oh, we're on page 314. Thank you for asking. So we came in here, we had BD through TM. And now this is saying, hey, we want to add some data functions to this. We're also interested in that salesperson name and the number of customers that salesperson is responsible for.